Welcome to the BCI podcast. In this episode of Biology Career Insights podcast, I'm honored to welcome true veteran of the life sciences industry, Mark Bloomfield. With over 40 years of experience across commercial, executive, and leadership roles, Mark has worked with some of the most recognized names in biotech and diagnostics, including Thermo Fisher Scientific, Agilent Technologies, Applied Biosystems, and Life Technologies. But Mark's impact goes far beyond corporate boardrooms. From scaling early-stage startups like Polyplus-transfection, now part of Sartorius Stedim, to guiding SMEs as CEO, chairman, and consultant, Mark has dedicated much of his career to helping young companies navigate the complex path of commercialization, growth, and leadership. Today, he continues to support the next generation of biotech leaders through his work with George James Limited and his own consulting firm, Mark Bloomfield Consulting GmbH. This conversation dives deep into the leadership, resilience, business strategies, and the evolving biotech ecosystem through the lens of someone who's been there and done it all. Welcome to the BCI podcast, Mark.
Thank you very much for that very generous and warm introduction. And I would just ask that I could not say, honestly, I've done it all. I've done some, maybe more than others, but often less than others too. But thank you very much for that nice welcome.
Most welcome. Yeah, I know that you're modest and you had a long journey, 40 years of long career, but I want to kind of have a deep dive into your journey so far. So tell us about, the beginnings. How did your journey in life sciences begin?
Well, I would say looking back to the very early days, and I'm talking, pre-university, it was serendipity. So happy accidents, some not so happy accidents along the journey, I must say, but the early days, very much serendipity. So, I'd chosen to study sciences at secondary school, high school level. So biology, maths, physics, chemistry. So I wasn't going down, arts route or towards the law, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I'm talking about being 17, 18 years old. What I was interested in was, botany, biology, zoology. And I know, we probably all reflect on the conversations with our parents back at 17 or 18. As you get older and maybe you have kids of your own. My dad said to me, there are no jobs in botany, biology, zoology, not that pay anything. You could be a teacher, you could be a government employee. And I was finishing school in the late 70s, which was the start of a major recession in the UK economy, which lasted, all the way through into the early 80s when I actually graduated. So I chose to study chemistry and environmental sciences, which was mainly small molecule chemistry with a kind of bunch of modules, undergraduate modules around, biology, botany, zoology, other topics. But it was primarily a chemistry degree. So a lot of time in the chemistry lab boiling things. That's my memory. Most afternoons, 16 hours of reflux to produce some particular organic chemistry, and then off to do spectroscopy or other analytical techniques to prove you produced the molecule that was desired by the experiment. So you say, well, how do you get into life sciences from there? Well, I left university in 81, so already a long time ago.
And Mark, where was this, location-wise?
I was born in the northern parts of London. Those days, it wasn't the town I was born, which is called Harlow, was not part of Greater London. London grew up to engulf Harlow, which is in South Essex, like it has from many other towns in the area. But my family moved to Nottingham when I was 3, so I don't have a lot of memories of Harlow because my dad changed jobs, and I went to school in Nottingham area, grew up there, and then I went to university in Cardiff at the University of Wales Institute of Science and Tech. In those days, there were 2 universities in Cardiff. One was University College Cardiff, which is for the science, more for the arts and and law, and UWIS was definitely a science, engineering, mathematics facility. But they were all close together in the city of Cardiff. So I was first time away from home, effectively going to university in 79, graduating in 81. So what I learned when I was at university, which is probably also a pivotal life experience, is I'm not a very good student.
And meaning like you didn't have good marks, or you were like low IQ?
Well, that's a very, very astute question. So the temptations of being away from home also lead to social temptations. And
absolutely. Absolutely.
Cardiff, which is in South Wales, has a very strong drinking and sports culture, and maybe the two are combined or associated. So I spent more time in the pub and in the rugby club and going on tours to do more drinking and more rugby. I wasn't very good at rugby, but I was very good at drinking. So I came out with what my tutor, who was a very, very nice and generous man, told me was a drinking 2-2 second class honours degree. But I still got honours. He was very pleased with me for that. He said, you turned up, you boiled your reflux and you did your reports, but you're not going to go on to postgrad. And I agreed with him. Academic life, despite the ability to go to the students' union and have subsidized beer, was not for me. So I left university and I didn't know what to do. Economy in the UK was pretty poor. So I went to do manual jobs. And that was also I use the word formative. It was very educational because you actually got to work with people who were going to spend 40 or 50 years doing a manual job. People of my age, early 20s and some older.
And manual, and Mark, manual means like the normal
labor.
Blue collar. Yeah,
physical labor. So I give you one experience. I also worked in pubs and nightclubs and restaurants and bars, mainly evening work. But during the day, I worked in a diesel repair shop. The port of Cardiff, we say, not as big as it used to be when the coal industry in South Wales was in full swing. The coal industry was already pretty much gone, apart from a few pits when I was in South Wales in the 80s. But Cardiff is the entry point for bananas into the UK. It's where the geest boats come in from the Caribbean. And the small company I worked for used to service the parts of the diesel engines from the geest boats, as well as other commercial boats. So you're basically having relatively dirty and stinky components from diesel engines coming into the workshop to be cleaned, repaired and tested, and then sent back to the ship. And you had tight turnaround because the ships want you to get out back onto the water to make money. I worked there, as you say, blue collar, blue overall, working boots, hard hat sometimes, as well as gloves and gauntlets, and 7:30 in the morning or 8 o'clock in the morning until 5 in the afternoon, 4:30, and then in the evening I do pub work or bar work.
And Mark, was it like out of necessity, or like you just kind of choose to kind of gain this experience?
It was a combination of two. One, I didn't want to move home and be dependent on my parents, because once you're out of the house, I think it's probably a good decision to stay out of the house. Going back usually ends in disagreements, not always, but sometimes. And the other one was I needed to pay for my rent.
Got it.
My father, was supportive. My parents were supportive, but they also said, well, you're 21. We've paid for you for the first 21 years.
No,
don't sit in your rented room, because it wasn't an apartment, it was rented room, and expect us to pay for everything, so you can go out drinking every night. So I worked and I learned a lot. And like I say, I met people of my own age who were starting their careers and were going to be probably blue collar. Maybe they would get a supervisor, first level supervisory job, a foreman's job. And I met other guys who'd been there 40 years who also, had brought up families and were, doing their time and were, planning their holidays, thinking sometimes towards retirement. So I think it was formative or educational in the fact that it told me that life could be very different if you choose to do that. And, the quality of the people I met was extremely high, and people who with real intellect as well, some not, but very smart people who were just basically doing the business. And, we used to get paid in cash on a Thursday afternoon. There was no bank transfers. It was all cash in an envelope with a pay slip. If you got overtime, it was Saturday morning or Saturday afternoon, very occasionally Sunday. I did those kind of jobs for probably 18 months after university, so not a short period. Maybe it was even 20 plus months. But eventually I needed to earn more money. So I went into industry, actually in a development lab in a company, the development lab was involved in producing carbonized cloths. So, and this is, basically you take a synthetic cloth and you basically carbonize it in the furnace. And this was to absorb different kinds of toxic gases and poisonous gases. So it was, the company was heavily involved in respirators and gas masks, also diving equipment and, oxygen rebreathers for the mines rescues. So it was a, bona fide business, part of a relatively large group in those days. But they had a new development, which was charcoal cloth, as it was called, I get the name right now, which was being developed for use in both civilian and military respirators, gas masks. And the reason for that is, the traditional absorbents used for, should we say, military gas masks have very high resistance, so they're very hard to breathe through. Charcoal cloth had a very much less resistance and a much higher, at least technically, a much higher absorption, was a bit more tolerant to water vapor, and could be coated with different chemicals like silver to absorb cyanide and so on. So I wasn't, should we say, looking for that job, but it was a job that I applied for and was given. And I learned a lot again moving into the lab, but also, again, like my undergraduate, I was not a great lab scientist. I enjoyed a lot of the work, particularly the manual stuff, but, the long report writing and the quality management systems and the other stuff was not so much fun. Later on, after a couple of other changes, I landed up in sales, not by choice, but the company I was working for, I'd moved back to Nottingham by then. The company I was working for was closing down. We were 290 people in that particular facility, and we were going to go down to 3. And I was asked to stay on and maintain, a small production in the lab. And I chose not to be alone in this very large building with 2 other people. And I said to my girlfriend at the time, I'll take a sales job for a couple of years or a couple of months until I find a better lab job. And I stayed in sales and then general management, as you were saying earlier, at leadership positions for the next 35, nearly 40 years. So it was really serendipity that brought me into the space. And initially, my first sales jobs were in analytical instruments, so selling gas chromatography systems and mercury porosimeters and a few other things. Later on, I moved to HP, the part that became Agilent, and we were selling gas chromatography, liquid chromatography, mass, small molecule mass spec. And later on, LCMS started to come through. By then, I'd moved into a marketing and support role in Europe, and we started to see biomolecules. HP Agilent really didn't focus on protein separations by HPLC. That was the realm of Pharmacia and a few others. Now Cytiva with the ACTA system, which has been around for almost as long as I have. But later on, I would say I went truly into life sciences when I left to join Thermo, and Thermo were already busy building mass spec as well as having spectrophotometry products. They had a much broader product portfolio than Agilent. Not the reason I left Agilent, but one of the advantages of Thermo is you had a lot more to sell to a customer. So that's how it all began 30+ years ago. So really not, and the point I would try and make is it wasn't planned. I didn't have a grand plan that, I was going to be CEO of this or VP of the other or, anything else. I was just making my way in the world, like I think a lot of people do.
Absolutely.
You have some interests, you have some passions, and then stuff happens.
Amazing. No, I'll just also kind of, go in bit detail. So how long was this, the blue collar job period? And then why did you move to the lab? And then, I understood that, the lab was closing, the company was closing, and that forced you to kind of take a sales job. But how did this transition happen? Or it was just one thing led to another?
So I left university. My graduation was the summer of 1981. Get the numbers right. And I needed some money, so I started looking for a blue collar job, and I did what was, we say, popular at that time, thanks to a gentleman who recently died called Norman Tebbit, who said, "Get on your bike and look for work." A couple of days after the graduation, which was a very boozy affair, last time to be with kind of many of the colleagues who were going off to other parts of the country for work or to go home. I got on my bike, literally, and went down to the local industry estate, and I went door to door saying, "Have you got any work?"
Wow.
I was kind of a bit of an innocent abroad. I said, well, why not? We can go to the local labor exchange and sign on for unemployment after university, which many of my colleagues did. But I wanted to work, and I got on my bike and I went down to the local industrial estate, which is on an Arth Road in Cardiff, near where I was living. It was a couple of miles cycle, and said if I can get a job there, then I can cycle to work every day and I won't have to pay bus or, anything else. About the 10th place I knocked on the door, very, compared to me. I mean, I was 20, I was just 20. I was going to be 21 in August that year. A very old man came to the door and said, "What are you looking for?" I said, "Well, anything." And he's looked at me and said, "Well, you look big and strong." I said, "Well, I try." And he said, "Well, we need a laborer, to help lift stuff around and move stuff between benches and clean stuff up, do the very basic." We talked about money and it sounded okay to me. And he said, "When can you start?" I said, "Now, if you want." "Well, why not? If you've cycled there, why cycle home with no pay,
Absolutely.
And he said, "Right." And he was the foreman, and he was, an amazing character, in his late 50s already when I met him, full of stories of his childhood in London, because he was a Londoner, moved to Cardiff with his wife, who was Welsh, and full of stories, full of encouragement, full of ideas, and if things are going wrong, let's have a cup of tea and stand back and see what's gone wrong, and good wisdom, basic wisdom. So that's how it all started. And I was there, as I said, at least 18 months. Maybe it was a bit longer, maybe coming up for 2 years. The pay was poor, a few pounds an hour, even with overtime, and I needed to change my accommodation because the property was being sold or refurbished. We had to move. We all had to move out, and I needed more money because where I was living at that time was very cheap. Anything I could find after that was going to be unfortunately more expensive. So I needed more money. So I'd been working pubs and restaurants in the evenings to get a few more pounds. And then I said, well, why not use your degree? You got your drinking 2-2 from the UIST. So I started applying for jobs, and I got a couple of interviews, and then I got this position with a company called CB Gorman, who don't exist. I think they might exist still, but the group they're in has changed a lot. And this was a bit further east, so I had to relocate to another town in South Wales, in eastern South Wales. But the good news is that the company found me an apartment for a very reasonable price. I've shared with 2 other guys, but
still, I think
that was really helpful. So it got me out of my jam. I got a better pay. I was clean most days. I wasn't covered in diesel oil and solvents and stink.
And you got to use your degree, right? That's also important. Use your education,
And whatever you like to think when you're 20, 21, 22, there is still influence. Let's even say pressure from your parents to say, well, we supported you through university for 3 years. Now you're doing this, which is great. We prefer that than you being unemployed. But when are you going to start living, working, using the education that we've helped you with? I mean, even though tertiary education in the UK is in quotes free, it's not free. You have to pay your living expenses. You used to get a small grant, but the grant was dependent on your parents' income. So effectively, my dad had to subsidize my living expenses through 3 years of university. And he was very, very generous, very good in that respect. So in the end, you kind of conform, you start to conform, but you also say, if I stay as a blue collar worker all my life, I can look forward to 50 years of this, and then what? State pension, even at that young age, with your parents moving through their own life, you see the planning necessary to have a successful landing somewhere, sometime, somehow. So the pressure was on from within me and also from family to say, hey, you've had your decompression from full-time education for 15 years or 14 years or whatever it was. Go out and get a real job.
So you started your real job, say, after this 18 months of
about 1983.
And then you stayed there for, say, about a year or even longer?
No, I was at CB Gorman for kind of 2 and a bit years. And then I went to the Ministry of Defence at Salisbury, Porton Down, for a couple of years. And then I went up to a lab job with a company called Thorn Electron, who were part of the Thorn Lighting and other group. It was a multinational in those days, a multi-industry group. Was broken up later. And I worked for a company called Thorn EMI Simtech, who were basically, they did many things, but they had a contract to manufacture explosive detectors for the Ministry of Defence, which is how I kind of got involved with them. Because when I was at the Porton Down, we also did some work on these detectors, trying to find hidden explosives. And of course, in the mid-80s, the troubles in Ireland, in Northern Ireland, was still going on and there were still bombings. So detecting hidden explosives quickly on vehicles and in containers and in property was a security priority. I mean, there were sniffer dogs too, but government wanted, we say, more technical approaches. And then we started to adapt those to find concealed drugs. So heroin, cocaine, all have residual solvents, and you can sometimes, if they're not properly wrapped, I mean, cannabis is relatively easy because you can smell it, even if it's, double wrapped and triple sealed and whatever. I mean, herbal cannabis is extremely pungent, but, other hidden drugs. So Thorny and my Syntech had a couple of contracts to manufacture these and test these products. And I was involved in the development of new product and new components and new adsorbents and new chromatography systems to try and improve the selectivity. Because, of course, the last thing you want are false positives and the last thing you want are false negatives. So, if you, as we used to say, if shoe polish, in those days, people polished their shoes with real polish.
Yes.
Some people still do. I still suffer from shoe polish box somewhere in the house. So, yeah, shoe polish used to trigger a lot of the early systems, and that was too ubiquitous. But you needed to improve the selectivity and sensitivity of the system, and that's basically the job I was doing in a small team. And then that company was closed down, business was sold and relocated to another company, and I said, I'll go to sales for a couple of months, and 40 years later, I'm still selling, as I said. But I sell kind of ideas and thoughts and
advisors,
people, rather than a particular product. Although, as you know, when we work together at Metabolon, I can also sell service if I have to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Mark, so here's like, we are all the product of our circumstances, but, we also have some drives and motivations, like you want to achieve something or you want to kind of something attracts you. So looking back to your career, it seems like as a young, guy, you are not particularly motivated to do something. It was just out of necessity, or like, you...
No, you're right. I had no calling. When I was a much younger person, I'm talking preteen, I dreamt of being a marine biologist because that looked like a very exciting, dynamic and wonderful job. But of course, I didn't have the academic standing to get into one of the 3-4 marine biology undergraduate courses available in the UK.
And was it very competitive there, like to get admission into these courses, or you were like, okay.
The marine biology, there were only three universities in the UK that offer undergraduate. You mean, in theory, you could have paid to go to an American university, but my dad certainly wasn't going to pay for that. He said, I'm already paying tax here.
Yeah.
You go to a UK university, and that's a very reasonable approach, saying if you're already invested. So it wasn't a question of, well, buy your way into an American university undergraduate course. So no, early on I had those kind of
aspirations, or dreams. And
later
then
on, it was,
yes.
as I said to you, I was kind of curious about botany, biology, zoology, but and I still am. If I choose to watch anything on TV or online, I usually something about the natural world always attracts my attention. So those interests happen. But from a career point of view, it was really, as I say, serendipity that pushed me along and necessity. But what I found out when I went into sales, and it took 18 months, and I was very tempted to stop being in sales and go back to the lab.
You didn't enjoy sales in the beginning?
In the beginning, I was not successful. And, if you're not successful in sales, you're on a short fuse, as they say. But I was lucky that the territory that I took over had not been worked for many years. And also probably serendipity, good fortune, that the management team that was above me was continuously being overhauled and changed. So nobody really spent the time, A, to train me, but also B, to performance manage me, to use the polite term. So after 18 months, all the work I'd put in, and I was very, active. I wasn't sitting at home waiting for the phone to ring. I was really out there trying to get things to happen. Then the sales started to come. And I went from being, the lowest on the performance ranking to being one of the top 2. And in a small team, a team of 5 or 6. And you say to yourself, this gives reward. I drive to Newcastle. I talk to 10 different people. I tour the university. I go to the industrial sites, knock on doors, like I did for the job I was telling you about, blue collar job. And, you start to listen to people when they tell you how other salespeople, how they do it. In those days you read books because there was no online. And I talked to my dad, who was not a salesman, but he knew a lot of salespeople because he'd worked in companies too. And you asked to talk to them, and you try and learn, grow your skills and competencies. And then I eventually, because I was being more successful, the company invested in me and sent me on some, formal sales training, a couple of nights in London, which is always a great thing. And for a young man, 3 days of sales training, 2 nights in North London, getting trained, and then you go back full of ideas which you want to put into practice the next day when you visit customers. So that's how it all began. And it was really the sales thing came from the kind of almost the let's call it the Pavlovian, but the reward. So if you go out and sell and you do it correctly, you get reward. So, whether it's a better car or more bonus or commission or whatever it is. And, I was not really a, competitive animal most of my life, but in sales, it's easier to compete because it's very clear who's the better salesman. It's the one who's got the most sales at the end of the month.
Absolutely.
When you're at university, are you a better student? Well, until there's a final exam, nobody knows. That's 3 years to wait. But every quarter or every month, there's a list up on a board somewhere saying, who sold the most.
So sales made you competitive, and of course it was rewarding.
Yeah, and and the more rewarding it was, the more competitive I became. And then you start to say, well, how do you get to do more sales? Well, you move to another company, you find better products, you have a bigger area. All these things started to go through your head.
And Mark, what was like the greatest challenge during those times, because you didn't have the sales background, you just started fresh? And what were the greatest learning during your this initial
early sales life? The greatest challenges were, how do you actually manage coverage of a sales territory, and where are the customers? Because we didn't have very many existing customers. You couldn't go and call on the installed base, which later on I found was more or less all you had to do when you worked for the market leader. I was working for a no-name company. So there was probably only 3 or 4 customers on the whole of my territory, which was the whole of the north of England and Scotland. So a big geography. So how do you find new customers? And then how do you persuade them that, no-name company that you work for is a product they should risk paying out good money for, particularly when if they're doing gas chromatography, which is the main product I was selling, they probably have Hewlett-Packard or PerkinElmer or Varian.
Established.
Shimadzu was not in the market at that time. It was emerging. But, I was working for an Italian manufacturer called Carlo Erber, who are now part of Thermo. Everybody's part of Thermo eventually. Sorry to tell Danaher and that story, but eventually Thermo will take over the world. But yeah, they were an independent company, actually part of Montedison, the chemical company at that time. And I worked for their agent or their distributor in the UK. So, that was the first big challenge, is who to sell to, where to find the labs, because, you didn't have online where you could look who's part of the chromatography community online. You looked in business directories, big books, basically, 20-kilo books that had listings that companies paid for listings. You looked at postcodes. You went to all the universities. You talked to the universities. Said, well, who does chromatography here? You went to local chromatography society meetings, up in Newcastle. If there was a chromatography society meeting, you went along, beetled along, bought a few people a beer and asked them for information. So those were some of the biggest challenges. And then it's, how do you convert somebody? You can always create interest in something technologically different because you're talking to technical people. But how do you convert that to a sale? How do you close? And, that was learning from doing and learning from other people who were more established and more successful in selling. You say, well, how do you get them to close when they really want to buy another Hewlett-Packard because it's the easy thing to do?
And Mark, so how do you close the deal for our audience? Tell us.
Well, often it's quite remarkable. You say I'll give you the example. So you go to a lab where they've got 20 Hewlett-Packards, all performing very nicely and never break down. And if they break down, there's a service engineer to come fix them. And you say, if you have one of mine, right, just to get the first one in the door, and it doesn't work, you can move the experiment to the HP. But if you put one of mine in, you will have this access to this additional technology, a particular injection port or a particular detector or some other feature that you found is of real interest to the customer. It's not just, you're not just throwing features at them. You're saying, well, you've already done their qualification. You know that they're really interested in that piece, but why should I spend £6,000 or £10,000 on one of yours when I can have an HP. I said, well, the HP won't do this. Ours will do all the other stuff that the HP will do. And you'll have access to this wonderful tool, technique. And to sell the first one is the key, because once you get it in there and you support it, and sales in those days, we didn't have online technical support, chat boxes. So you used to do a lot of the technical support yourself by, from a phone box, no mobile phone in the car, from a phone box. If the customer had a problem, they'd leave a message at the office. You call them back, or you go and visit them if you're in the area, try and fix the problem. If it was an engineering problem, I was very good friends with the local service engineer. In fact, that was the first kind of team, I wouldn't say I built it, but we built a team to service our customers, because we kind of a bit away from the office, which was in the south of England near Gatwick Airport. So quite a long way from where we were working in UK terms anyway. So, get the first one in by selling the fact that if you've got 15 or 20 HPs, you don't have a capacity problem. We could put a standard injector on our box. We call it a box, but on our wonderful chromatograph. And you can have this special injector to do some experiments with. And, that would often close the deal with a technical buyer. If it was the economic buyer, to use the language, you're just purely down to negotiation, And the good news about the company I was working for is they were relatively generous with discounts, trying to get product into the market, because distributor has to sell product in order to keep the distribution agreement. And I'm sure they were buying them for much cheaper than I knew about. So I didn't know cost of goods in those days. But that's how it started. And to get the second one in, you'd say, well, if you gave the support and you helped them and you proved what you said was correct with the special injector or special detector, then you say, well, you need to do more of that. So you can only buy it from us. You can't buy it from those guys. And, when they start retiring HP, maybe you get in to talk about it instead of being just told about it when you get there and say, oh, that's the new HP that we bought last week. So, it's like you say, it was a great learning experience and some tough days, driving 400 or 500 miles home after not getting the sale is always a moment for reflection, or an hour for reflection. But you've got to pick yourself up and go again.
Absolutely. It's also like sales teach you a lot of resilience, right? Because it will make you humble. Yeah.
And what I would say, and you probably would hear me repeat this in our conversation, you learn an enormous amount from your customer. I mean, I learned a lot from the technical specialists, the product managers, all the specialists inside the companies I worked for, the guys and girls who, no disrespect by calling them girls, the boys and girls who have, understood how the machine worked inside out, upside down, and the chemistry. But I learned more from the customer because they have the need. Often they don't need all the features that manufacturers put in. They need the feature that they need, and that's the distillation, the qualification process.
Absolutely.
And listening to customers, asking them questions, saying, please educate me. Why do you do that? How do you do that? What alternatives did you look at? Open questions, decent conversation. And in those days, I would say I was probably one of the last generations of salespeople where you had to get somebody on the phone was challenging enough, and nobody spent hours on the phone. There was no online. And B, if you were there, you got an hour with the scientist or the technician, because there's no point you coming in for 10 minutes.
Exactly.
Really, you now everybody's texting, and I understand we have to adapt. Texting and messaging and onlining, and if you get to do an on-site visit and actually see the lab, that's a miracle. I mean, I've done a couple of projects in recent years where, I've been rewarded by the fact that I'm along the salesman says, we got so much time with the customer, it's unreal. Normally they're chucking me out after 8 minutes, but because you're there as a consultant asking more general questions, maybe more high-level questions during a particular project, we've got more time and tour of the lab. A couple of sales people I traveled with recently said, well, first time I've been in this customer's lab, because normally they say you don't need to see it. You sit in the office, you tell me, you answer my questions, then you get out, or we do it by email, online messaging, whatever. So the world has also moved on.
And Mark, the next question that I have, of course, selling, a product which has a unique feature of course, has its own merit. But sometimes you have to sell a Me Too product. Sometimes it's just a Me Too product. And how do you do that? Or did you experience selling that?
Yes. Well, after I left Carlo Erber, I went to work for HP, the part that became Agilent Technologies in 2020 and 2021, through a spin out through an IPO. And, you were up against, in those days, it was for gas chromatography. I'll focus on gas chromatography because it's probably the easiest. It was HP 5890 against the PerkinElmer X, Y, or Z. And mainly it was split, if it's capillary, splitless injection and an FID, flame ionization detector, or you'd be still doing packed column injector, either with a mega capillary or an FID. So very straightforward, very standard operations. And then the differentiators become non-technical, but usability, HP, higher level of automation. So if the customer had more samples, you knew you had an edge because automation on the PerkinElmer was more difficult because they had horizontal injectors. We had vertical injectors. You had data systems became more important. So when I first started selling chromatographs, it was a chart recorder or a very basic calculator. Eventually Greens came along, and HP were very powerful in computing. That was their main business. So we had a very expensive but very competent workstations based on Pascal operating system. PerkinElmer had a screen built into the gas chromatograph, which used to also fail because it used to get too hot and all kinds of things. So you start to pick on smaller things, and instead of picking on, as I did with the Carlo Werber sale, because you're competing for, who has the dominance in that lab, the lion's share, you're saying, well, standardization, easier training, better support, more automation. You have to find the small differentiators or the systematic differentiators that make your product more attractive for the technical decision maker. For the economic decision maker, of course, it always comes down to price and contracts and service. But an HP were very, very tough on discounts. But you then learn, if the technical decision maker has chosen you, you have a bit more power with the economic buyer, the purchasing officer. And standardization and continuity and better support. And HP were very good, at least in the northern part of the UK. They were very good on support. We had some very, very good engineers and some very good engineer managers. So it became a battle of little points. And then, what you hoped for was that you would have the lion's share. And okay, occasionally a Carlo Werber would turn up or a variant would turn up because it had X or Y that we as HP didn't have. And you just write it off. You say, okay, but you get information. How much did you pay for it? Why did you buy it? And then when you're in, you're asking, well, how is the new box doing? Is it doing what you want? Is that new feature really valuable? Because you want to know what the future might have in store. So you shift your approach and your qualification to understand what are the small differentiators, the things that the customer might buy and you put in your favor when they come to do their decision. And it also, a big part of it is turning up, being present, responding on time. When they ask for a quote, don't wait 3 weeks.
Yeah, the usual thing.
The usual stuff you'd be surprised. I mean, often a customer would say, well, we asked for quotes for PerkinElmer and they didn't send it. You say, well, maybe the guy's ill or on holiday or they've got a problem. But if it works in my favor, I'm only too happy. But I'm not going to let that happen for me.
Yes.
I'm going to be responsive. Yeah. And if a message is not transmitted from the office, then, I will be asking questions of the sales admin saying, you dropped that one. Now, what are we going to do next time, please? You don't have to be nasty about it, but you say, because errors happen. And I was also committing errors, but you have to ask for people's support. And selling is a team job, no matter what any salesman tells you. Absolutely. Sales admin, producing the quotes, because quotes were not produced online. Those days they were typed into a system and spat out on a 8 duplicate printer, heavyweight HP printer that had 8 copies. Amazing days. Anyway, those are the great learnings for me was, learning how to differentiate yourself and to be clear, qualification, make sure you understand what's important to the customer, not just throwing features at them, hoping one will stick. You have to get through that qualification, find out what's important to them very early on and keep on working on those points. Because if you start throwing just any old feature around, you look desperate and you are desperate.
Fantastic. So Mark, looking back to your career, I think you have moved fluidly between, global corporates, and also early stage startups.
Yes.
So what drove that transition and how different are the leadership challenges at these companies?
So I'd worked initially, Carlo Werber was a small company, part of a small distribution, but then I went to HP in 1986 or 87. That was my first corporate. And from there, I moved to Thermo Electron in those days, Thermo Fisher. And from there to ABI, and then for a short period, Biotech. And I got my I think, my fill of corporates at that time, the quarterly reporting, the matrix, never-ending matrix structure, which has its uses, no doubt about it. And I'd progressed. I'd got seniority, and I'd relocated from UK to Germany, Germany to Switzerland. So I'd made good career progression over those 15 or so years. But in 2008, when it was clear that ABI was up for sale, and late 2008, Vitrogen, two companies then formed together to make Biotech, which was then later bought by Thermo. So just be careful. The world.
It's a macrophage.
It's
It engulfs everything.
I was sitting there at home on garden leave because I've been made redundant because they don't need two VPs of this or three VPs of that.
From ABI, you mean?
From what was already LifeTech. So I worked through the transition from AB into being acquired by Vitrogen, the formation of LifeTech at the beginning of late 2008. And by mid 2009, I was redundant because, and I knew it was coming. It wasn't a surprise. And I said to my wife, do I go back into the corporate world? And I'd been interviewing for 6 months already because I knew I was going to be made redundant. And I'd interviewed with Waters and with what was then PerkinElmer, and I'd been to Becton Dickinson and Beckman Coulter and all the usual corporates around the block. I said to my wife, I'd like to do something different, work for small companies. I won't probably have a senator card anymore, and we won't have this and we won't have that. But maybe, it'll be a more satisfying, rewarding job. I didn't really know, but I assumed that from talking to small companies who had been customers, that the culture and the life was going to be different. So I said to my wife, I'm going to set up as a consultant. She's, mid 2009. And she said, you can give it a couple of years, but if it's not paying the bills, you have to go back to work.
Normal. Any wife would say that.
And so I got the support, and 16 years later, I'm still consulting.
Wow.
So it did pay the bills, at least enough to make Mrs. Bloomfield happy. And I started off working for consulting for small companies. Then I did some consulting for medium-sized companies. DACO, now part of Agilent, which was kind of medium-sized company. And then I started working later on Polyplus.
This is something which is like a bit fascinating for me. I will come to your consulting thing later. I'll ask you which kind of consulting you do. But how did Polyplus happen? Because Polyplus, I was aware of that company, and then it got sold for $2 billion. So I was like, wow. So it was like a huge transformation of the company. Right. So tell us more about how Polyplus happened and what was your role there? What was the pivotal moments?
Well, like salespeople, consultants also gossip with each other.
Yes.
So there's a very, very good guy called Bob Penny, who's based in the Cambridge area of the UK. And Bob and I worked together when ABI bought Ambien, and he was leading Ambien in Europe. Ambien's the RNA company. I got to know Bob through that transition, that integration. And then Bob went back to consulting, and I kept in touch. And he phoned me up one day and said, a headhunter in Paris has called me, and there's a small company in the Alsace looking for a VP of business development. I said, is it a consulting job or is it a real job? He said, don't know. So I called the headhunter, who I still talk to, now based in Miami. Swapped Paris from Miami, probably not a bad choice in certain times of the year. And I went along for a couple of interviews, and it all seemed to work. And then they said, well, actually what we need is a CEO. What do you think? I said, well, I've got some experience. I certainly think I can help the company scale. And, we seem to have a very solid science team and, small in-house manufacturing. So I said, I think it will work. So we started off on a kind of short-term basis in early 2010. I was already still working part-time for DACO, transitioning out to a full-time successor. I've been doing an interim role for them in Germany, Switzerland, Austria. We started off part-time with Polyplus in, early February 2000.
And Polyplus is based in Strasbourg, right?
South of Strasbourg, in a small town called Ilkirch. Yeah, the University of Strasbourg has an external campus, a green campus out in Ilkirch, and there's a biotech park there, including some better-known companies. Well, Polyplus is probably better known now, but in those days, there was a couple of other better-known companies on.
No, I'm asking because how good was your French to be the CEO there?
Well, and that's very interesting. I had studied French at school up to age of 14 or 15. And then I'd lived in the French-speaking part of Switzerland for 8 years. So I was And as my wife says, you have no fear. And I have no fear when I'm speaking foreign languages. I have some hesitation because I can't find the word, but I have no fear of making mistakes because if you're speaking to a native French or German speaker, they will help you unless they want to punish you by correcting you on the spot, which is also helpful. So I went along with my Swiss French and my schoolboy French, and for the business social, it worked fine. I think most of the business language was done in English because most of the customers were English speaking. I also had German, which a few others did because the Alsace is multilingual, but I was I could actually talk to customers or was willing to talk to customers. Most of the German speakers in Polyplus in those days were in the chemistry lab and they were not really happy to speak to customers. And that was part of my job. So when we dealt with German suppliers and German customers, I could also help. And of course, being native English speaker amongst mainly French nationals, not only, but mainly French nationals, you have an advantage when it comes to North America.
Absolutely.
And, translations. So, things like, although my spelling is not the best and my grammar is not the best, at least I can, should we say, write coherently in English. So I did. I'm not saying my colleagues couldn't, but it was always good to have it anglicized for the North American market. So in the end, my deficits, which were many, and their positives, which were many, we came together.
Fantastic. Yeah, no. So tell us more, because, how did you scale up? Because Polyplus, when you joined, were like how big, and when you left, was how big?
It's always a very interesting story. So when I joined in 2010, company had a small transfection reagent business, selling transfection reagents 1 ml at a time, as I called it. Sometimes it was only 0.75 mml, but 300 euros or 180 euros per dose, and you would sell 1 or 2 ampules or vials of material to a lab per month or per quarter or per year, depending on how much transfection they were doing. It was it was probably, say, €1.25 million of transfection business, milliliter at a time. And the reason they wanted a new CEO was they'd just raised some money from existing investors, plus a new local investor, an Alsace-based investor, to bring forward some RNA delivery technology. So chemical modifications to RNAs that made them deliverable into living cells. So the idea was, with this small raise, they would do some mouse studies and some other early clinical work and prove that these two platforms provide enhanced RNA delivery. And of course, RNAs, sRNAs particularly, in those days, they've come back again recently, were also topic du jour in the therapeutic market. So we took the money, we went from 25 people to 48 people. We had to take on an additional office to sort of give more space for the new hires, contracts with the local mouse farm, mouse hotel. We did all kinds of good experiments with the patent estate. And we started then in, early 2012, we had enough data to say, well, let's go and see if we can find some licensing deals. So we were attending Bio. We hired a boutique firm, an advisory firm, to help us market. But unfortunately, at that point, the bottom fell out of the RNA therapeutics market. Roche closed down their facilities. They've since reopened with P-Red. Pfizer had made acquisitions. They closed that facility in Northern Europe. And again, like the pharmaceutical market does from time to time, it went through a cycle of RNA is never going to be a blockbuster. So we're out. And of course, the market cooled and we were running out of cash. So mid 2012, we had to do a massive restructuring, massive by our scale. We went from 48 back to 20, which in France is a pretty tough story.
Yeah.
And a very involved process. I wouldn't say complex because it's straightforward. It's clear what the process is, but it's also very, very tough on people because, of course, you've got 2 people competing for a job and it's a point system, he or she who has more kids and
the social,
So the social component. So coming out of, should we say, late 2012, we got back, we'd been through the restructuring. We were kind of recovering from that experience, and we still had our core reagent business, which had been growing reasonably, let's say 5-10% a year. We cut back our costs to be basically break even on the core business. But of course, the investors are saying, well, what are you going to do now? Because as you stay at sub 2 million reagent business, even with great margins, it's not going to be a very exciting business for us. So there was all kinds of discussions. I would say that and this is my memory of it, and it's some years ago, there was a colleague called Habib Khoury, who's now with Miltenyi Biotech, excellent colleague, excellent scientist, and I think an even better commercial guy now. He came in one day and said into my office, which was as usual. I had the big corner office, not big in real terms, but I had the corner office, and said, "Let me talk to you about large-scale transient transfection." And I said, "Go ahead." And I'm not a transfection expert. I'm not a cell biologist. And he brought with him another colleague, Pascal Belguise, who is his boss and our head of marketing. And we started to talk about large-scale transient transfection, which was basically the production in those days of AAVs. So it was the early start of gene therapy. And Habib had been doing some reading, and he was well informed. And we said, okay, what can we do? So we said, we're going to repackage our existing product, ethylenamine, PEI, in larger formats, basically half a liter, at different price point per ml, and sell it to the guys and girls who are doing 50 liters of culture media, 100 liters of culture media, 500 liters of culture media.
Wow.
To produce AAVs for, in those days, early stage, maybe early clinical, formal preclinical, early clinical stage AAV-based, AAV-mediated gene therapies. The joke, so we did that repackaging and started to sell, and there was a lot of anxiety in other departments saying, well, we sell half a liter to this guy, he's going to break it down into 1 ml packages and resell it. It's paranoia. If that happens, we'll know about it, because we'll see it in our data and we'll be able to intervene. But we need a new business line. And the kind of the ace in the hole for Polyplus, and this is why they got the high valuation and the early mover advantage in this field, is we were already producing PI for a GMP through subcontractor network for some plasmid-based therapies, early clinical stage plasmid-based therapies. It's not very well known now because the company's really not succeeded, but there was a spin out from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, which was looking at bladder cancer, and they developed a plasmid which would, when it contacted a bladder cancer cell, would produce a toxin, kill those cells. So it was and they needed PI to deliver that through the infusion system. So it wasn't systemic, so you didn't have all the systemic issues that come with, bloodstream delivery or spinal fluid delivery. But this was, installation into the bladder of refractory bladder cancer patients that already had the
localized,
very localized, and refractory bladder cancer patients, people who've had already the best-in-class surgical and therapeutic treatment, but they've got recurrence, and this company was targeting a refractory bladder cancer, and we'd already set up a GMP production. So we were able to say to customers who are in the AAV business, we can follow you from research with a RUO product through into preclinical with a highly qualified product, which is tested like a GMP product, but produced in a non-GMP facility, so it doesn't have all the cost. And we can also produce you a GMP batch. Some of it was hot air because we couldn't produce very big batches of GMP, but we knew we had time because it takes you 5 years or 3 years in that accelerated approval to get through the clinic. So we started off down this route. In parallel, we were still trying to grow the 1 ml at a time business and do whatever else we could, including enforcing patents and executing license deals with those who were using PI without buying it from us, because we still had a patent up till 2015. So we basically put all hands to the pump and used the income from the licensing deals before the PI patent expired to fuel the investments needed to build the large-scale transient transfection business. And it was all PI, different formulations, packaging, improving the GMP, duplicating building plans to duplicate GMP sourcing. So we had redundancy of supply, improving the quality systems which were already in place. And maybe we'll talk about that later when we talk about another topic. Polyplus was, had early mover advantage, had a couple of jokers in the hand, particularly with the GMP production, and had a very solid quality team. Those capabilities really fueled the pivot from being, a 1 ml at a time to being 10 liters at a time, 100 liters at a time.
And normally, Mark, like, you mentioned about Habib, like who just walked in your office and discussed a proposal and you agreed to it. But normally these decision makings are not that easy, right? Like you need further alignment, stakeholders, you need to discuss this, like you need to do your due diligence and stuff like that. So you said it in a very easy way that he just came with a proposal and then you said yes. But how is this decision making?
Yeah. You're right. But the good news about SMEs is very short lines of communication. You don't have 100 stakeholders including finance and quality control and compliance and HR and whatever. It's also timing. Company had just come out of a restructuring, was surviving. When I phoned the president of the company, who was part-time employee, and said, we're going to try a move towards large-scale transition, and I sent him the brief that Habib had written, plus some other work that other colleagues had done.
And Habib was a scientist or was a marketeer?
He was in marketing. He was product marketing manager. He was a PhD scientist as well. So it didn't take very long for the president of the company to say, go ahead, because it wouldn't cost much, because we are taking an existing product.
Just packaging,
marketing. So the real expenses were the marketing and the training for our very small sales team. A couple of people in the US, a couple of people in Europe, mainly distributors in Asia, and we were also intending to try and start selling direct, because once you start shipping GMP, you don't really want distributors in the supply chain, because it creates additional problems, or potentially creates additional problems. I'm sure some distributors are very competent, but in those days we didn't feel that was the case with our existing distribution team. So, it wasn't a big investment, and, the money, the revenue looked good from the projection. And of course, everything you send to approval has to have some kind of financial forecast. So you say, well, it could be another €1 million business in a year, 2 years time, because if you're selling 10 liters at a time, instead of 1 ml at a time, you only need 10 customers instead of 1,000 customers. The leverage is there, and we already have visibility of, okay, they're not in such good shape today, but Bluebird Bio was really hot and running in those days. And, we had contacts with Lonza, who were going to be their CDMO. So, there were 3, 4, 5, then there were 10, then there were 20 companies, pretty much all in the US, who were potential customers for, and when the first orders for half a liter, then a couple of liters came in, you're immediately vindicated. And of course, if you're going to go from doing shake flask scale to a 50-liter wave bag, you need 50 times, even 100 times more transfection reagent per wave bag than you do per shake flask. And as we all know now, as we're all better informed, the real Achilles heel of gene therapies is the number of active and fully filled and high quality and effective AAVs you need to produce to have a effective dose, a clinically effective dose. And, you read some of the postings and publications today, and, the doses are extremely high to have any therapeutic effect. And they have some related toxicities and problems, as we see with Sarepta having to withdraw their recently approved drug. So, you're in a compassionate stroke, unmet need area, but there's a lot of activity. And of course, once after the small US biotech started up, the big companies started to get interested again. And now we see Novartis and Pfizer and Roche all buying assets in this space. And you have to ask why. Well, translational opportunities in other cancer, translational opportunities in other indications. But the technology, although it has many, many challenges, is now, from a therapeutic point of view, being more and more proven. And of course, CAR T, which is a cell therapy, came along later. CAR T cell therapies don't use very much transfection reagent, but they have other needs. They do use some transfection reagent, but they're not the large scale producers of viral vectors like for gene therapies. And, we followed the trend. I remember before I left in summer of 2016, we had the first customer who was building in Europe 1,000-liter bioreactors. And in the US, we had reports from a couple of customers of 2,000 and 5,000-liter bioreactors in creation, because it takes, more than a year to build and to commission, because they're in a GMP facility. So, well, it was a fortunate, I talk about serendipity, but, Polyplus got first mover advantage because they had basically the transfection molecule of choice for producing AAVs in HEC293 cells, which is PI. Other transfection reagents would do it. It was efficient, meaning DNA consumption, plasmid DNA consumption was expensive, but better than most other transfection reagents. We could RUO, highly qualified, and GMP, although our GMP capacity was very
limited.
But we could meet demand.
But you had also big competitors, right? Like, for example, Lonza.
Thermo are the giants of the transfection world and still are from a revenue point of view. But Thermo did not follow us into the gene therapy area. They held back for whatever reason, and they do very good marketing and market analysis, and they've focused much more on the cell therapy world, which I think helps them sell more of their services and other products. And at the end of the day, the transfection reagent market for the value of the global transfection reagents for gene therapy is still a couple $100 million, which is for Mark Casper's piloting the $45 billion enterprise macrophage, as you called it. Does he really want to spend a lot of money getting 80% of 200 million? No. So we're also flying under the radar. But, since Polyplus was bought, Mirus Bio was also bought by Merck. Mirus was the best other competitor, and other transactions have gone on. But, Polyplus was the standout because Sartorius decided to pay very generously for the asset. And it was reflected in their share price and the subsequent loss of the CFO.
And Mark, I have a question. So what are the common mistakes that the early stage biotech founders make when it comes to commercialization, for example? Because some do make it very successful, but I often see a lot of mistakes also, right?
Oh, yeah. And it's easy to be critical. Human nature allows this. But I think the top of the list for me is typically scientific founders, and we'll talk about scientific founders as well, are usually the CEO at this stage. And I'll be very blunt. Many, and not all, as you were saying, but many believe that people will come and buy my product just because it's brilliant, because I invented it.
You fall in love with your own product rather than,
right. All we have to do is put it on a website and the orders will come. And lo and behold, the orders do not come, or not enough.
But this is not limited to scientific founders, I must say. They're like, this is the fallacy that many founders I have seen, they just love their product rather than just...
I'm pretty sure it's the same in electronics and others, but in my view, the critical problem is a belief that you don't need sales, you don't need marketing, and you don't need to fight for visibility. Sometimes, and there's always this, what I call, it's not really a myth, but it's very rare, you get a viral thing going, not a virus, but viral marketing, where somebody uses it and then they get awarded the Nobel Prize the next week, and then they write about it on social media. But this is not the way to build a valuable company. This is happenstance. So I think one of the critical early mistakes is the overbelief in your own product. It may be a brilliant product, but if people don't know about it, it's such a noisy world out there with so many things competing for scientists. If that's scientist is the technical decision maker in the purchase, looking for answers and doing their job, living their life. How do you get visible? And for me, critical mistake is, we're going to launch this commercially. We'll have a few dealers and distributors, and we'll have a great website and people will come. I've rarely seen that succeed without, as you say, serendipity. Other, should we say, internal failures, I think failure to delegate and to empower. Often the founder knows how to do everything, whether they're scientific or not, and thinks they're the only one who can do it right. So they're not great people managers, and to scale any organization beyond yourself and your wife, you need to delegate. And your wife
why is this?
Your wife is excellent at delegating because she says it's your job. Next on the list would be not listening customers if they disagree and say, I don't need your product, so therefore you just didn't. And to employees, as I said, one of the things I think I benefited from in not being having done research and gained a PhD or an MSc is I don't believe in my own scientific wisdom and knowledge. So when Habib comes in, supported by Pascal Belguise, who was another excellent colleague, and Pascal was always very, very demanding about any idea. You said this has been through the mill if she's sitting in the room with Habib. She's done most of the diligence. So why would I not just say, okay, Tell me more. How much can we sell? Who we're going to sell it to? Ask the commercial questions. We tested, we phoned somebody and said, would you buy? How much would you buy? Et cetera, et cetera. So you're listening to employees because you founded the company and you know best. And then I would say the next phase, and I'm referring to my notes as you can see.
Oh, no.
Staying too long in the R&D phase because it's fun. Invented this. Nobody's buying it. It's not my problem. I'll invent something else. Just ask the investors for more cash. So there's also the critical piece of, if you're going to go to market with a product, and you may have, 2 or 3 different possibilities, sometimes only one, but sometimes there's 2 or 3 potential commercial products. Make sure you show you can sell it and become a revenue stage company. A lot of companies, founders and CEOs don't want to move to revenue stage because it gets quite ugly. You have to keep on growing the revenue as opposed to just increasing your spend.
Exactly.
And I think the other 2 are more pragmatic. One is pricing. What is it worth? A lot of products, nobody knows what it's worth, and that comes from talking to customers. Systematic, structured, and evaluated voice of the customer is an absolute, for me, a critical must-do before you go to market. If you've not talked to 100 customers at length, in detail, with a systematic and structured survey, and gathered the data and then analyzed it in a structured and systematic way, how do you know what the price point is, what the real needs are, what the package size should be, all kinds of things. And a lot of startups effectively throw a product on the market. We have an MVP, we throw it on the market, they don't do the diligence, and because it's time consuming. And honestly, for a lot of people, it's relatively boring. Statistics, same interview, 100th customer.
But it's mandatory.
I think so, but a lot of startups don't have that oversight. You say, okay, well, if you've got a VC on board or a seed investor or an angel investor on board, they should be giving you these direction. But I think sometimes it's missed in that, well, get it in the market and let's see if it sells and then we'll know. I don't think that's a recipe for success, because sometimes you contaminate the market. Sometimes, you have to withdraw the product and go silent, back to being silent again. None of this is good for the impression of the technology. Because one thing you can say is the market remembers, not everybody, but eventually the market remembers if you snafu. And then the last thing is, and this is true across many fields, including diagnostics, what is your go-to market? Are you going distribution? Are you going direct? Are you going reseller, OEM? What is your real go-to market and why? Because every channel has its virtues and its weaknesses. And if you don't get the channel mix right and the pricing and the agreements and all the other and the controls on those channels, things also do not happen as you expect or in the time scale you have promised. So, it's, for me, if the product is a B2B or it's a B2C or whatever it is, you better have figured that out and understood it well before you start to launch it into the market. And, later on we'll talk about, scaling. Again, there are many steps of preparedness to be ready to scale and to diagnose whether you're ready to scale. And, you should really have a lot of green lights across your scoreboard before you press the button, because you're going to commit a lot of time, money, and other resources to the market. And if you're not successful, then your business will potentially fail. So, it's...
No, these are fantastic insights, Mark. So of course, the extension to that question, what signals basically a small company that it is ready to scale? What are these signals?
I kind of break it down into early and late. As a consultant, sometimes you come in when there's still time to react, and then sometimes you come in when we've launched and now it's not working. What are you going to do?
And mostly it would be the later, right?
Often, yeah. As I often say to people, not usually the CEO or the board who've hired me. When I say to people in the organization, the fact I'm here means there's a problem, not with you personally, but there's a
to
problem.
The business.
And because you don't call the fire brigade if you're having a nice day and nothing's on fire. What I call early signs of readiness to scale. Product or products meet the design specification. If you don't have a design specification, we have to have one, and not just written about what the product currently does, but about what the customer wants the product.
Wants. Absolutely.
So product design specification based on customer input and needs. Going back to our point. Sounds just like paperwork, but business plan ready. And it means a bit more than that. It means a business plan that talks about all the things you're going to do to be successful in the commercialization. So it's probably 50 pages, could be 100 pages of, market, competition, pricing, discount strategy, channels, all the whole thing. So there has to be a comprehensive plan. Why? Because if it's all in the head of the founder, it will never be completely and effectively transmitted to the different functions. And particularly if you're using consultants, outsourced distributors, how do you communicate? Okay, you're not going to share your whole business plan with everybody, but you might want to say to the distributors you're recruiting, here's the marketing plan, here's the distribution plan that we expect you to execute. So there's something in writing. And then in the organization itself, the structure, do you have assigned resources for support, for sales, for marketing? Because either they're in place or being put in place. If you say, oh, R&D will do that, or our manufacturing guys, chemists will do that, but who's going to do the manufacturing and who's going to do the R&D? We'll talk about innovation later. So there's often a misconception, we'll just, the R&D guys will just spend an hour on their phone, it won't cause any problems. Well, of course it causes problems. And the guy who's synthesizing the product or building the machine will come off the assembly line and the test line and answer calls and emails from customers. It works up to a point, maybe when you're doing alpha or beta test, not when you're in the market.
Absolutely.
And then it sounds straightforward, but a company may be pretty small, but all the key people in the company, which in a small company could be absolutely everybody, including the receptionist, not that we have receptionists anymore, but you know what I mean. Everybody is on board and they understand what's going on. And it's not, I didn't know we were launching this month.
Yeah, and this is often a problem. I've had such experience where a company, just discusses things among a few employees on the top, and then other people in the team have no clue.
Right. And the result is usually a disaster. And then finally, that you have enough funding on board to execute the plan that you put out there. Because if you have to go out for more money or run short of money in the middle of your launch, the launch will suffer. And a lot of people are still trying to raise money when they're going to market. And I understand the connections and I understand the challenges, but you need to have enough money on board and enough runway to get to the end of your launch plan. And yet, if you have a couple of months extra in the bank, great, because things will also happen. Things will typically happen slower than you expect. And then what I call late signals, it's have you got really strong positive feedback on the product when it's put in the hands of alpha and beta testers? Cannot overstress the necessary for have powerful and complete response from alpha and beta testers. And the cherry on the top of that would be if those alpha and beta testers saying, well, we've used all the stuff you sent us, whatever it is, reagent or equipment, and we want some more because we're now building it into our everyday workflows. Then you've got traction.
Absolutely.
So if you don't have your ear to the market, if you're not talking to customers, if you're not engaged with a S group, a alpha group, a beta group, a customer panel, you are going to be flying blind. And I think these are all the typical potential mistakes. Clearly, and you said it a few minutes ago, companies do succeed despite, but many more fail. And it's very hard to explain to the investor why your promised first revenue product is not reaching the targets. And it usually leads to very unhappy conversations or Mark Bloomfield turning up.
And here's another question. What does Mark Bloomfield Consulting do? In actual, is it sales consulting? Is it strategy consulting? Is it a mix of everything? Or you have a niche area that you kind of help customers with?
Over the years, and I'm not going to try and provide a list. I've tried to do everything that a customer asked me to do. So I've done interim general manager of a geographical region, DACO, because they needed somebody to step in and stop the bleeding because they were losing market share and business and people, right the way through to when we're at Metabolon together, going out and selling services. And why do I do that? Well, I usually know somebody in the management team. So common colleague, Michael Rasher. I knew Michael from DACO. Michael called me and said, I'm doing this new gig with Metabolon. You got any capacity? I said, to do what? He said, well, basically end user sales. No problem. So I'm willing and interested for a price to do whatever the customer needs typically in the customer facing area. But I will also talk in marketing, particularly as we've discussed in voice of customer, product specs, marketing process, and, if needed, into quality management systems. I'm not a green belt or black belt or any other kind of belt. I've been through a lot of quality system training from HP, Agilent, Thermo, ABI. I also am aware of the regulated world of IVD and so on. I'm not a specialist. I'm more of a generalist, but I have good awareness. So pretty much anything in the life sciences, medtech, diagnostic area that I think is helpful and interesting. So it's a really
360 approach.
Yeah. One day I could be doing strategic plan. Next day it could be go to market advice for a new product development and launch. Week later, it could be out on co-visiting IVF labs with salespeople, asking questions about, how they choose suppliers and, why they prefer supplier X over supplier Y, right the way through to picking up, getting on the train and going to see a customer in Germany to try and sell a large, but not too large because we had limits on how many tests we could sell from Metabolon before it became a different product, but selling some large scale projects to universities and to Roche Pharma and so on. And I'm, like I say, I think I'm effective in a lot of these areas because I do not assume I know so much. And I'm always asking the customer for help and I'm asking my colleagues for help. And I'm probably quite a sponge for resources, but I always say if I do it in a good collegial and friendly way and people look like they're willing to help and I'm not getting any big pushback, then let's go and let's do this together. You remember Vinny Pawar from Metabolon, commercial guy. We worked very well together as a tag team, he with much more scientific knowledge, me with much less, me with maybe 30 years more commercial experience. And, if I needed help from Morrisville, phone up, be polite, even if they're difficult at times, blah, blah, blah. So it's all about trying to get the job done with the power of the team.
Absolutely.
So Mark Bloomfield Consulting, we've done interim, we've done strategic, we've done marketing. I've done, as you probably also know, mentoring. So CEO phones up and says, I don't know how to deal with this investor, colleague, employee, supplier. I said, no problem, let's talk. And the value proposition there is, A, I will not gossip about this conversation with any of your colleagues because I'm not an employee. B, you'll get an unvarnished opinion from me, very direct and honest. And if you don't need my advice anymore, you just stop the contract.
Absolutely.
So I've done quite a lot of CEO, small company, medium-sized company, advisory, coaching, some of it supported by the board, some of it because the CEO phones up and says, I'm stuck on this and that. Mainly they have all the answers. They just don't know which one to pick. And, like I say, that also provides reward. That's not so sustainable because, they should, the person involved should grow out of you, move on, maybe find other or better advisors. But I've done a bit of advisory as well.
Fantastic, Mark. So now again, one question related to this, So when is the right time for a founder or scientific leader to let go and bring external leadership, basically?
The easy answer, the quick and dirty answer is about a year before product launch, first commercial product, first revenue. Could be a little longer, could be a little shorter, but I think a good year before would help. Why
do you say that? Why do you say that? Because, the founders knows it all, right?
Yeah, but often they do know it all, but not the commercial piece. And if they know the commercial piece, they're often missing something else. For instance, let's talk about quality systems. Does a early stage startup need ISO 9001, 2005? My view is yes. A lot of founders will say, we'll do it later. This is too much time. And I don't want to do the paperwork. Reversing ISO 9001, 2015 into an established or a more established company is really tough. So I think, if you have a founder who's really started from all the basics, process systems, such as you can probably leave it later to bring on, to step, for the founder to step into the CSO and president or chairman role and leave and bring in a CEO to run the commercialization step and the support the Series A, B, C, D funding, because that's a big part of what the CEO Has to help with the founder can do a lot, but often the credibility in front of investors comes from a CEO who's been there, done it. If none of these processes are in place and it's just, well, we've grown organically and we're beautiful, which I also understand, then you probably need a couple of years for the CEO to come in and help to reverse engineer some stuff, because it's very hard to go from ISO 9000, no ISO at all, to having ISO 13485. So, I think it's like every case in its turn. If you're purely RUO, I would still have all the systems and
processes in place.
Moving on to something really boring. Most small companies don't have effective reporting systems, so they don't know what's going on. Or maybe one person does because they're guessing, estimating. But once you start to do reporting for VCs, you're going to need a reporting package, and you're going to need to have somebody who can chuck out the reports quickly. If you're having to do it all on Excel and the CEO or the founder is spending his weekends basically doing junior analyst work, waste of time. These systems need to be in place, just like accounting. You may have your accounting outsourced, but if you can't run a P&L statement at the end of each month, what are you going to tell the investors? What are you going to tell yourself? Because you've probably got a lot of money and time invested in the project too. So I think my view is minimum of a year before first commercial launch, possibly better longer, 18 months, 2 years. And you could say, well, we don't know when it's going to be, and that's too far ahead. Well, guess what? If you've raised money and you've not put the CEO salary and cost module in it, you're going to have to go out and raise money, because no CEO comes cheap. I mean, only some will work for equity, but only for a short time. That's my 10 cents on that.
No, fantastic. I just wanted to kind of, because you have given your perspective based on, like a founder who has raised capital, but there are like many, companies which are bootstrapped. They have grown and now they want to kind of, the CEO comes with CEO as in the founder comes with some idea, and, he's like believing in the idea, but maybe others aren't as much believing in that. And in that context, the same advice in that context, is it valid? Like, they should hire somebody a year before or something like that.
I think one of the critical pieces for any executive or entrepreneur founder is self-awareness. What am I good at? What am I not good at? And being honest with the guy, as Michael Jackson said, the man in the mirror or the woman in the mirror. So I think it's still good advice. If your real passion is R&D, innovation, invention, go with your passion and let somebody else do the hard lifting in commercial, supply chain, quality, regulatory. Doesn't mean to say you're going to lose control of your company, because that's done through shareholding. You're still going to get diluted at the next funding round. But as founder and scientific advisor or CSO or CTO or whatever you're going to be, you can have more of your time doing what you want to do and less of the time doing what you don't like to do, like ISO, quality systems, if that's not your passion. And you spread the load, because the typical entrepreneur, founder, CEO is often the bottleneck, because they still only have 24/7, 365, just like all of us. That piece of the pie doesn't change whether you're Bill Gates or Elon Musk, and telling me you can survive on 4 hours sleep doesn't impress me, because you might be able to do it for a couple of years, but I can tell you from the vaunted age of 65, I would kill for 4 hours sleep in one session. So it's pretty much again, it's always my view. These are true. The best founders, the best entrepreneurs either have that self-awareness or they have somebody who tells them and they listen. And I think it's more often it's held, and somebody who tells them they listen can be their wife, can be their business partner, can be a co-founder, can be an advisor. And sometimes it's their doctor who tells them to. Let's be clear. So no, I'm really pretty clear. If you're going to scale and you're not just going to become an endless startup, which is what unfortunately happens a lot in the Europe, 20-year-old startups with virtually no revenue, and they burn through 25 or 30 million. Whereas in Massachusetts, which is biocentral at the moment, if you're not making it, you're dead. Everybody, if the investors don't kill you, the employees leave. So there's a better startup around the corner,
Exactly.
So no, the European market is unfortunately full of, and I use the more common phrase now, zombie
The zombie startups.
And I get to visit a couple of them, and you say, my advice is close down, take whatever IP you have, try and sell it, and move on. Because, if you've been at this for 10 years and it's not happening,
it won't happen. Yeah.
99% of the time won't happen. I mean, you might get a technology pivot like we talked about at Polyplus, where you say, suddenly we find a new purpose for a product we envisage for something else.
That's a rare occurrence. I mean, it happened also with Biotech. It was the same case. So this happens, but that is very rare. Coming back, Mark, so you have mentored so many people, and what's one piece of advice you consistently give to emerging biotech leaders?
Let me flip pages. So they're probably a repertoire of things we've already talked about. Listen to customers and have some sort of structured approach. Having a few customers who you go out for a beer with is great, but have a systematic and structured approach to getting the voice of the customer. And over time, particularly when you've got product in the market, certainly before market launches we were discussing earlier, and then when the product's in the market, don't just stop because the product's launched and you're getting some sales. There may be things they're going to suggest, the customer's going to suggest, that will enhance Rev 2 of the product, or you may have a tweak, particularly its chemistry. Get a lot of feedback from very wise users who push the product or the system in directions it was not originally spec'd to go to, but it's actually valuable to the lab. So continuous voice of the customer is one advice. And again, repeating a bit what I said earlier, listen to your employees and do it in a structured way. Have one-to-ones. Ask them what they think's working well. Ask them what they think's not working well. Ask them what they would do if they were in the corner office. And, offer them the seat if they're really showing some, say, here, you sit over there, I'll sit over here, you tell me what you do. I'm joking a little bit there, but employees, not all good ideas come from the C-suite.
Absolutely.
A lot of really good ideas come from the front line, whether it's sales, support, marketing, whatever, even the factory floor, particularly when it comes to product innovation, product improvements, or manufacturing improvements. And be open to that. Don't say, well, doesn't have a C-level job or a PhD. It's everybody who's working inside the company has eyes and ears.
Absolutely.
And those that touch the customer have clear customer opinion to share, and they should be part of your voice of customer. For instance, if you have a sales desk, sales admin who are processing orders, taking orders, confirming shipments, chasing, short shipments, returns, speak with them about what the customers are telling them. Are the customers, are we able to fulfill their needs? What other services are they asking for? What other products are they buying? Bring them into the process, make them feel valued. And I think the other point is actually that in your company, how do you make your colleagues feel valued and appreciated? Yeah, there's always donuts and coffee. There's always a fruit basket if you're a bit more, we say, health conscious. There are, within the limits of the taxation situation, there are Amazon gift cards and there are, tickets for the cinema. But most, I believe, and this again, personal opinion, I believe most employees feel valued if somebody talks to them and listens to them and really listens to them. And I understand in bigger organizations that's really difficult, but then your management team should be doing the talking and listening to. They're your delegates and you need to delegate to them and empower them. But if you're the CEO of a small company, you should know everybody and everybody should know you, and you should be able to have those conversations.
Absolutely.
And you can say, well, I really should be in my office crunching this Excel. Well, that can be done at night, at the weekend. When you're in the office and there are people around and they're available to talk to you, go talk to them. And if you want a one-to-one with somebody, invite them for a one-to-one. And if they get worried about it, you say, it's just a one-to-one. We're just going to have a chat. I just want to hear what you're thinking. And you can ask me any question you like.
Oh, fantastic.
Likewise, if they want a one-to-one and they knock on your door, you say, if you really cannot answer then, say, give them immediately a time when they can come.
No, that's
if somebody wants to vent or to download on you, that's also fine. You can also manage that. That's a manageable process. And if somebody wants to tell you, I've got a miracle, you should want to listen to them. So that's my 10 cents on those typical issues. It's customers, it's employees, it's distributors can teach you a lot. suppliers can teach you something. Always be talking to the people who are involved in enabling, activating, driving your business. I'll finish on this point. Long time ago, 2000, when are we, 2001, I worked in the same organization as Mark Casper when he came to Thermo Electron for the first time. And he was division president of the division I was in, and I was N-2 or something like that. But I got to spend a bit of time with him, and he was a very young man. He was only in his late 20s, early 30s then. I was a younger man, but not as young as him.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember one of the pieces of advice he gave me. He said, the job can be 80% spreadsheets and 20% people, or it can be 20% spreadsheets and 80% people. Better to make it 20-80 in favor of people.
Fantastic.
Looking at his longevity and success, particularly in navigating Thermo through the recent post-COVID bubble burst and the current tariff considerations and the China market issues. And I look across at Danaher, who are, half the size, but also historically a very competent business. Thermo seem to have navigated much better.
Absolutely.
And I put that down to also the consistency of him and Steve Williamson, who's going to retire this summer, who's the CFO. They've been a team for the last at least 10 years. So, there is consistency, there is continuity, and there is wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
And like I say, one of the pieces of coaching I often give to somebody who's stepping up to their first CEO or C-level role, which I do occasionally, is exactly the 80-20 rule. Don't let it become 80% spreadsheets, because the better informed you are will not help you when really you should be asking customers, employees, suppliers, distributors questions. They will help you see the market. You have to synthesize that, and you might need a spreadsheet to help. Just looking at the financials, you have a CFO and teams of people to do that. CEO, you should be people heavy. No,
fantastic. So, Mark, what's something now that you wish you had known when you started? It's always difficult, to go back and reflect, but
the benefits of hindsight. I have very few regrets on the business side, absolutely for sure. I think I was, for the good and the not so good reasons, I'd often, done what suited me. And I'll come to answer your question in a second. So what do I mean by that? I have a very short span of attention. I like new stuff, new challenges. Even if it's the same old problem, I like it in the new context. So I tend to change jobs quite frequently. Even when I was 12 years with HP and Agilent, I did 5 different jobs in 12 years and changed countries 3 times. Recognize that in myself. Don't stay too long as a consultant. Go in, try and deliver the value and get out. To answer your question, what do I wish I'd knew then that I know now? One is I should have gone into SMEs a bit earlier. I was already 50. 49, because the environment and the short chains of communication and the immediacy, even though you often, as you said earlier, bootstrapping, or you're so short of cash, you have 10 euros to spend, where do you spend it kind of decision. I think I would have thrived better going earlier, but I would not give back the nearly 5 years at ABI Biotech, because that was a great experience. And I worked with some tremendous people in Thermo, in HP Agilent, and in ABI Biotech. Some not so great people too, but that's also a learning. So what do I wish now? I would wish I'd known when I was 30 that I should have maybe gone to SMEs when I was 45 or 40 instead of being nearly 50. But that's probably the only change I would make. Yeah, you can look back and say, well, if I'd stayed there, I might have got more money or more options or more this. At the end of the day, I would have probably also got an earlier coronary or an earlier stroke, or as my wife says to me quite often, you would have had an earlier divorce. Your divorce is still pending. You don't have to worry about it. So in the end, I like I say, I've chosen to do things a lot for my own preferences, like changing jobs or moving companies. I have friends now who are retiring after 35 years with Agilent and HP, a very nice pension and all this kind of stuff. I say I still wouldn't swap it. I would have either been killed or probably killed. I don't want to say, but I would probably done some damage to myself if I'd stayed in Agilent for 35 years.
No, that's fantastic. Coming to the last round, like a lighter round, it's a quick Firelight.
Know.
So a book or resource every biotech founder should read.
Well, I'm not saying that books are passé, but I think the modern biotech founder is probably time constrained. So I would go for online resources. I think Genome Web and all its associated publications are a better newspaper for the industry than most other sources. And I'm talking about, other print and electronic media. So I'm a big fan of Genome Web and its many publications. Why? Because it's often speed reading, and then they have a couple of deep dives. A little bit of a nod to you, I think, listening to podcasts, particularly if you're looking for career advice, career development. You can go to professional services, and they are often very, very valuable. Listen to podcasts, listen to people's life stories. If I would give a hint towards books, read the biographies of people who you admire and dislike in both similar quantities. So, I went through a period of reading quite a lot of biographies of business people, which I think are often a bit like Jack Welch and so on, which are often a bit hagiographies. Sometimes, biographies or autobiographies are like that. But I also read biographies of people I don't like some politicians. And you do gain a nugget or two, which is probably what is best value of insight about them as people and the decisions they made and the things as we've discussed today, the things they remember positively and the things they regret. So it also puts people back from being another bloody politician, excuse my French, into a more human form. And like I said, I think a big theme in our conversation today has been about people. It's trying to make things human again. And how do you get that inspiration to continue to interact with people and listen to them? Because it is demanding of you as a person. It is demanding of you physically and emotionally, particularly if there are tough and difficult subjects to discuss. You talked about resilience at the big top of the show. You have to build resilience, but it's also demanding to be brother, father, mother, confessor. But it's also very rewarding. But manage yourself in those situations. So resources, I would point to the web, I would point to podcasts, and I would say, also biographies, particularly of difficult people. I always think back of Richard Burton, the film and stage actor who died many years ago, was a difficult man. And I remember reading his biography probably 30 years ago, 25 years ago. And you say, well, how does such a talent fail to manage his talent and resources and squander his life, his relationships, his health? Because, I'm not saying we're all at risk of alcohol dependency and other things, but we can all overwork, we can all abuse ourselves in one way or another. And it's an insight into the mind, at least from a biographer's point of view, of the mind of a man with enormous talent. And I think it's not to compare myself with a man of Richard Burton's standing in terms of talent, but just to learn from the words about his experience and some of the decisions and misfortunes he invoked. Also, helps you ground yourself. We talked about grounding a little bit and staying.
So
and not suffering from hubris is an important part of any leader's job, because often we think, well, I made a decision, it was fantastic. Look at me. Well, that's what. Next time you fall flat on your face and everybody's laughing, then you will not feel so smug. So stay grounded.
And the second question is actually pertaining to that, one habit or mindset that help you stay grounded through changes.
Remember, it wasn't you. Always think about the team. Like I said, I name-checked Habib and Pascal from Polyplus days, but I could name-check 10 or 20 other people who helped to enable that transition. There were only, say, 20 odd people in the company at that point. So pretty much everybody helped in one way or another. And I think the way to stay grounded is to say, if it's a success, how did we get here? Who helped? And go and recognize them and say thank you.
Fantastic. So gratitude.
If it's a failure, don't be bold to discuss, not to sweep it
under the carpet.
But also to say, I take the majority of the blame. I know you all blame yourselves, but if you're looking for somebody to carry the blame, it's me. That's what you have leaders for. And, there are other people who help make decisions, but I push the button.
No, makes sense.
But when there's success, go and thank people for even if they say, but I didn't do anything. You say, you did. And remind them of what they did. For me, that's a critical part of staying grounded as a person. It's often easy, just to, you say, not just take the credit, but to forget to share the credit, actively share the credit. You might say, well, I didn't say, look at me. But if you don't go out and actively tell people, thank you, and you helped with this, and they say, well, it was nothing, you say, but I think it helped. I think it was important.
No, that's a very good suggestion. And Mark, the last question for this session, if you weren't in biotech, what would you be doing?
Well, if I was really smart, I have a couple of answers for you. I would have gone into hedge funds or to private equity, carried interest. But I'm not that smart. I'm not that clever. They have a.
So you think only smart people go in hedge fund or VC?
Well, I'm not clever in the way that they're clever in terms of financial instruments and engineering. So, and I can understand what I'm told or what I read, but it's not my passion. So financially, the joke of a joke. If I wasn't in biotech, I should have gone into finance, not the controlling accounting part, but the money management part, managing other people's money. But if I wasn't doing this, I would have been very happy being a botanist.
Wow. A professor, maybe, a botanist.
Well, again, that's a management job. I'm very happy tramping across wet grass or bogs or, hopping from, when I can, I'm not so active anymore, but hopping from stone to stone. I still enjoy gardening, which you can say is not botany, but it is when you have so many weeds and insects. Well, that's more zoology, but anyway. So I think if I was looking for the less financially rewarding, more fulfilling, and this is again with hindsight, I might have found it, it never too much botany is not a good thing. I would have been very happy, marching around some moorlands looking for rare plants and seeing how, certain flora and fauna were developing. Maybe, as you say, a few learned papers, maybe a few conferences. But yeah, I think botany still would have been another career path. But as we discussed right at the top, making money as a botanist is probably a big challenge.
Tough.
We can't all be David Attenborough, who's a bit more than just a botanist, or David Bellamy, who used to be a TV personality in the UK, is probably one of the more famous botanists, TV botanist. But no, in the end, serendipity and happenstance and some great coaching from other people and great support from managers and friends and colleagues. I came down this route, and as I said, I got addicted to selling pretty early on. So the botany was forgotten, at least until now, when I'm approaching, the last trimester of my career, where I can maybe look out onto the hillside through my window here and say, oh, that's going to be a tree in 10 years' time if I don't go and cut it down. So that's what I would do if I wasn't doing what I'm doing.
No, that's fantastic, Mark. It has been really a pleasure talking to you, and thank you so much for your time. I mean, I have to respect your time, otherwise I could go on and on. But yeah, thank you so much. And to the viewers, keep tuning to Biology Career Insights podcast, and we'll see you in another episode. Thank you so much, Mark.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.